Hey, hey, beautiful souls. Another day, another time for my daily walk. I just switched down by the sea today. We're down on the south coast. And I just want to ask you one thing before I actually start. And can you hear that? Can you hear the rhythm and the waves? You know, that pull and the return. You know, that's the sound of freedom. That's the sound of freedom right there. And that's what we want for our children, you know, to grow up and want, you know, this kind of lifestyle, not inside a system, but, you know, in a place where they can come and relax and enjoy and learn. That's what we want for our children, isn't it? You know, not boxed in some kind of classroom or not being told what to do, how long they need to sit down for, when they want to raise their hand for a toilet break and maybe to get told that, you know, you've had too many, you can't go again. You know, you want something that's freeing, that moves like the ocean. You know, Dylan's down there throwing rocks in the sea with Sam. You know, I don't know whether you can see him, he's just down there where those people are. You know, that's what we want for our children. You know, raising children in freedom doesn't mean, you know, giving them anything they want. You know, yeah, you might want an ice cream or something, but it doesn't mean giving them exactly what they want whenever they want. You know, it means that they're returning to everything that they already are. You know, I've spoken about this many a times. It's returning to who we are and what we know, isn't it? I think that's what it's all about. You know, returning to Mother Earth, returning to the breath, returning to the freedom of being able to wander along the beach and, you know, hear the waves, and, you know, it kind of soothes the soul, doesn't it? You know, it's about listening and connecting, you know, watching more than controlling, trusting, you know, even when it's uncomfortable. You know, it's learning how to trust again, it's learning how to breathe again, learning how to live again, kind of, you know. So, and it's not uncomfortable. You know, this life is not uncomfortable. You know, the old world taught us that children need to be disciplined, didn't they? And, you know, you need to discipline your children. You know, you need to put them in this box that this is what they're here to do, this is what they need to do, when, you know, actually us as a family do the complete opposite. We do the complete opposite with Dylan. You know, the tide, as I said, you know, the tide doesn't ask permission, it knows its own rhythm, you know, and our children do too. They know what they want, they know what they like, don't they? They know their rhythm like we know our rhythm. You know, and it's the rhythm of the life. And, you know, there are so many people I see, you know, on TikTok and in different Facebook groups and things, and, you know, they've set out their week's tasks, and, you know, they've put their charts up on the wall, and they've got their desk ready with their learning books and their materials. And this is how we learn. You know, I think you're taking your children out of one box. And if you're, you know, if your children get on like that, but, you know, that's fine. But for us, it's like you're taking your children out of one box and putting them in another box that's exactly the same as the school and education scenario. You know, let them get out in the wild, let them learn what they want to learn. You know, it's not about just taking them out of school and sticking them straight on a desk with textbooks and this and that and the other and tutors and things like that, you know, because they're obviously not getting on for school for a variety of different reasons, you know, and there are a variety of different reasons, and I do understand that. But, you know, you have to unlearn the system. If you're new to home education or you've been doing it for a while, you have to unlearn the system, you know. And if you haven't unlearned the system, then I think you really need to try and unlearn the system, because once you unlearn the system, that's when things start to make sense. That's when things start to drop in place. That's when your children start to ease up. You know, not when you're taking them out of one classroom and putting them straight into another. You know, And like I say, Dylan has come on leaps and bounds learning this way. You know, we free learn, you know. They don't need that same structure. They don't need those same rules because they wasn't flourishing in that environment. So why put them in the same environment, you know? Just step out of the system, you know. What we're saying is, you know, yes to raising our son as he truly is, as he wants to be, and learn what he wants to learn. And, you know, he's curious, he's wild, you know, he's sovereign. And most of all, he's whole. You know, he doesn't have any issues now. He hasn't got the bullying. He hasn't got the drama that goes on with school. And with the teachers, you know, he hasn't got the stress of, you know, exams when they don't need exams. You know, exams, they're just numbers for the school to make sure they're doing what they're doing. It's nothing to do with the children whatsoever. And, you know, again, it's, you know, there's so much stress put on children in the educational system nowadays. Whereas here, Dylan's having fun, he's learning, he's out in the fresh air, he's playing, he's doing what children do. And, you know, there are so many people out there that don't understand children are children. And people are too quick to slap labels on people, on children, you know, before they've even considered that children are children and they do misbehave, they are hyperactive, you know, they do learn in different ways. It's not about slapping labels on our children, and because that's just putting them into another box that they don't need to be in. You know, we don't teach Dylan to memorize, you know, we teach him to ask. You know, it's not about remember this book, remember the words, remember the lines, you know, sit down and write all these lines out on a piece of paper. You know, he's not memorizing. As I say, he's not a robot. Our children are not robots. They're free. They are living, crystalline beings. You know, we teach him to feel. We teach him to ask questions. We teach him to be free, be the one that asks the questions. You know, because when they ask questions, they start to understand. They start to understand what the world is. They start to understand and get a deeper meaning for what questions are being asked, don't they? Rather than just writing something out and that's what it is. And none of the children ask the question, so they don't know. They just know that's what they've got to put because it's been copied from a textbook. You know, we don't say this is how life works. We say, come and see. Let's learn together. You know, at the moment there's, you know, we've been looking at, you know, as we've travelled from the coast, you know, from Torquay, we're now down in Sussex, and we're noticing all along the shoreline, the UK shorelines, there is heaps and heaps of seaweed bloom, and it's all up the beach. There are lots and lots of jellyfish sightings and migrations, and they're all up and down the coast and along the beach. You know, so we're learning why is that, and it's not down to climate change solely. You know, yes, the waters may be warming slightly, ever so slightly, but that's not a main contributing factor. You know, what's going on in the world, and if you are awake and you kind of see through these false narratives that we keep getting pushed upon us all the time, once you see through that, this is nature cleansing itself, you know. The seaweed is the purification. You know, the jellyfish are, as I said in my post last night on Facebook, you know, the jellyfish are ancient beings, you know, passing information backwards and forwards. Yellowstone, the volcanoes, you know, this is all ancient ley lines and, you know, ancient places juggling and, you know, roaring back into life, because Mother Earth reflects what we feel, what we think. You know, it can feel our consciousness raising because there are more and more of us thinking, you know, going down this path and knowing that, you know, we are becoming more conscious and we are waking up and we are seeing through all the lies and the narratives and this 3D world that we've kind of been living in, that's full of hate and fear and destruction and you know, all of this horrible stuff. And it's feeling that we're waking up and we're knowing this and we're starting to understand this. And this is just Mother Earth kind of getting rid of this negative energy that's surrounded us for for generations, millennia, to be fair. You know, this is not a new thing, the whole kind of societal systems and that. It's not a new thing, it's a very old thing. And it's been going on for, you know, thousands of years in one form or another. So it's Mother Earth telling us she's feeling us waking up. Earth is waking up, it's cleansing us itself, and we're learning all about that. You know, you wouldn't learn that in school. The school wouldn't even tell you that's what's happening, because they just want you to think it's climate change, you know. Oh yes, you should stop flying about, and you know, you should stop doing this and stop doing that, and we need to, you know, we need to look after the planet. Well, do you know what? If we need to look after the planet, stop doing all the things that you're doing, governments and all of these agencies and big, you know, corporate companies. Stop doing what you're doing to earn the money that you're taking out off of all of us that are, you know, maybe working hard to pay all our taxes and our electric bills and our gas bills, our energy, you know, our petrol, our diesel, our oil. You know, we're paying for all of that. So why don't you stop doing what you're doing, empty your pockets for a bit, and let's see what happens then. But they won't, will they? So it's down to us. It's down to us to raise our consciousness up. It's down to us to see through the lies, see through the drama, see through the narratives. We are waking up as a human race. We definitely are, and we're seeing it, you know, more and more on a daily basis. Nomadic families pulling their children out of school, or even if you're not nomadic, you're just pulling your children out of school and home educating or world schooling. You know, there's lots and lots of people understanding why we are doing this. You know, we choose freedom for him, and by doing that, you know, we've had to free ourselves as well, you know, from expectations, from judgment, from the illusion that's parenting, and it doesn't just look one way. You know, parenting isn't just sending your kids to school or sitting them down with textbooks, maths books, science books. Yes, doing the odd project at home, but it's getting out here, it's learning in the real world and teaching them real life skills, not just the same out of textbooks and stuff, you know, real life skills that they're going to need when they leave school. How to manage money, how to, you know, how to navigate countries, how to navigate languages, how to navigate different cultures, how to integrate with all of those as well. That's what we're teaching our son. You know, things that they don't teach you at school, things they're shying away from, actually in reverse what they do at school in the educational system, isn't it? They kind of look the other way. So, you know, if you're raising your child differently, well done, congratulations, enjoy the journey. You know, outside of the lines, learn in your own rhythms. Forget what you've been told. Unlearn, unschool yourselves as well as your children. Because once you do that, that's when you realise what your children actually really do want, how they really do learn, how they really do flourish. I honour you if you have chosen this path. It's not an easy path. It does get easier. It definitely does get easier, but it's amazing. It really is amazing. You know, you're not breaking the rules. You're writing a new story, one where the child leads. You know, as I said, we're child-led. He tells us what he wants to do half of the time, you know, and we just go along with it, you know. We listen to him, you know. Life is a compass. He tells us which direction he wants to go. We don't control. We never control him. I can see some up there videoing me doing my talk. You know, let the sea remind you. You know, you don't need to force growth. Growth is something that happens naturally, isn't it? You know, in the forest where we was for the last few weeks, wandering through, you know, the forest just grows naturally. Plants grow naturally, you know. Don't force them. You know, you don't need to force growth. You only need to make space for it, you know, to let them rise. And let them be a student of the earth, of the systems, you know, the natural systems. And in doing so, you're shaping a world that remembers. You're shaping a child that is going to know what he's going to do in the real world. You know, you are teaching your child how to live, how to survive, how to interact with others, and not just be stuck on PlayStation games or Xboxes. They're actually teaching children about the world, and at the same time they're learning so much more about themselves and how they interact with the planet and how they interact with everybody. So that's enough for me today. I just thought I'd come on and give you a little talk today about home education. So thank you for walking with me today. Thank you for listening. As always, love and light to you all. Remember to look after yourselves and look after each other. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.